So I want to read this book, Curious Garden, which is a book by Peter Brown. And as we know, Peter Brown has said, please record all the books that I've written to your enjoyment. So Peter Brown also wrote one of our other favorites, which is Mr. Tiger Goes Wild. And if you look at he has a very common theme in his illustrations about how he illustrates wilderness and gardens, and which is held out in this book as well. So the way he does these, you can see it right in the very beginning with the stones, and then on the back with the flowers and lawn. And of course, he wrote an illustrated Wild Robot, which we're saving for when you're in the tracks class. So here goes. One boy's quest for a greener world. That's what he tells us. And it's the Curious Garden. It's very curious. And Peter Brown, he illustrated and wrote this book for his curious grandmother, Petey. So his grandmother was called Petey, which is kind of nice because his name is Peter. So the Curious Garden, and his letters are growing from a brick wall that spells garden. He has trees and flower bushes that are growing up from those letters. Now, we have to look at this page for a little bit because you can see the colors remind you of the way Mr. Tiger starts too. So Mr. Tiger Goes Wild, and in the beginning of the book, everything is quite drab. And Peter Brown loves two things. One of them is technology, and the other one is nature, actually. So I don't know which one wins out. When you read The Wild Robot, you think he actually wants nature to combine with technology to make something stronger. So there once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most of the people spent their time outdoors. I'm sorry. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind, and most of the people spent their times indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place, which it looks pretty dreary. There's smokestacks and smoke going out. The sky is not blue, it's tinged with like a yellowy brown. There's the colors that are green are actually not actually nature, they're just neutral colors. However, there was one boy who loved being outside, even on drizzly days. When everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. It was one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. So several means more than one, more than two, at least three, possibly more. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. So that dark stairwell may be one discovery, it may be two, but it's definitely a discovery. The railway had stopped working ages ago, and Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, and there was only one thing for the curious boy to do: go up. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last things he had expected to find up there, but when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. So his several discoveries, were a doorway that led up and out to the abandoned railway line, and he saw some plants that were clearly dying that needed a gardener. This bush has eyes. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. Sorry, that's the alarm. but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned, and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. I think one of those better ways of gardening is that he learned how to sing to the plants. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. You know, Liam, you were a real gardener. Here, that made you a real gardener is that you saw that something needed caring for, some plants. He was a real gardener, but now he feels like a real gardener. Most of the gardens stay in one place. Oh, I'm sorry, most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and the mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by the delicate plants, the more delicate plants. Look at Liam. Liam's like, wow, look at them go. Over the next few months, Liam and the curious garden explored every corner of the railway. Things are starting to change. He has a whole patch of asters that he's standing in, or daisies. I'm not quite sure what Peter Brown wanted those to be, but look. Shazam, the sky has changed. There's still some places that need to be grown into, and Liam is finding a way. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. So Liam is thinking of the plants, but he's not visiting the plants because he's sledding. And there is a lot of snow there, and it's important for some gardens to have freezing time to rest and grow and go underground so that when spring comes, they can come back up. So it says, rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it in preparing for spring. So he read books. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Winter had taken a toll on the garden. Wow, really? The garden had marched itself back? But thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. And he sings to the plants. La. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. This same thing happens in our forest at the Blue House site. The plants start up at the top of the hill and they roll down, just like the children. The children roll down and the plants roll down. So the garden was especially curious about old forgotten things. Oh, that's nice. Look at how the plants have grown in the old forgotten things. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. So Liam had to organize that up. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. Look, somebody's sneaking in some plants. But the most surprising thing that popped up were the new gardeners. Things are really looking different now. There's all the people lined up to become gardeners, and they're bringing the tools and the things that they need, watering buckets. Each one has a watering bucket because this doesn't have a watering system up there. You have to bring the water with you. Oh, just imagine how that feels on bare feet. Delicious. Picnics. Oh, water. Because you need water for animals to grow. And this is topiary. That's where you cut bushes into very specific shapes, as if all those shapes you can find in Mr. Tiger Goes Wild, those animals. And you can see that some things grow narrow and tall in some spaces, and some things grow all around and down. And there's a person that says, I am going to paint this picture. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed, but of all of the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began. Hey, wait a minute. Liam has grown up and has children of his own, and they are helping him grow those flowers too. All those plants. Oh, that looks so different. When you look at this picture, look at how different it is now. What? That's amazing. You can even see the same things. Can you see this railway line, how it curves and goes like that? Let's find it in this picture. There it is. It curves and goes like that. Everything is so different with trees, and you can see that the smokestacks aren't smoking anymore. It's a blue sky. All the green is filling all the land. The end. Now, Peter Brown tells us, it often seems impossible for nature to thrive in the city of concrete, brick, and steel, but the more I've traveled and the closer I've looked at the world around me, the more I've realized that nature is always eagerly exploring the places we've forgotten. That is so true. Thank you, Peter Brown. Hey, there's a picture of Peter Brown right there. Can you see him? Let me see if I can get that focused in better. No, not so much. Thank you, Peter Brown.